Yeah, okay, perfect. I hope it's okay. Welcome everyone back to the 6th session of the conference. This session is dedicated to well-being, and it should have been chaired by Professor Huerta, but because he's not in a position to do so, I will look at the clock during this session. So we will have 3 papers, one on feminism, the other on urban interventions, and the last one on Austrian welfare. And I really look forward to this diverse choice of papers on well-being. And I'm very happy now to give the floor to Vincente Morenas, who will present his papers entitled Economics and Austrian Approach. So Vincente, you have the floor. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I will try to share with you my presentation. Okay. Okay. Can you see it? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. I will try to. Okay. And now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Switch it to the second one to be sure that it works. To the second. Yes, it works. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Perfect. Okay, I am Vicente Moreno. I am doing right now my last year of a degree in economics at Universidad Loyola Andalucía in Seville, Spain. And this year, well, first of all, I thank you for having thank you to the I would like to express my my gratitude with the organizing committee and with all of you that are hearing me now, because it is a great honor for me to be here and to participate for the second year in this conference. This year my paper is entitled Economic Measurement and Feminist Economics, an Austrian Approach, and as the title says, it addresses the feminist economics theory on economic measurement and economic indicators, its critiques and proposals from an Austrian subjectivist approach. This work, I must warn, is in an early stage of development, and because of that, I'm sure that all the comments and insights that the audience will provide, I'm sure that they will enrich my work a lot, I'm sure. I would like as well to emphasize that this paper is aimed at contributing to a current that was born almost 20 years ago, around 20 years ago. There is the convergence between Austrian economics and feminist economics that was initiated by Austrian economists such as Steve Horowitz, Karen Baum, Deborah Walker, even Walter Block wrote on this topic, and I am currently trying to revive this current with new scientific papers, and in that sense, I am honored to inform you that my first paper on the matter that is entitled Ludwig von Mises as Feminist Economist will be published in the Independent Review soon, as far as I know, in the 2021 issue. So I encourage you to join this field of study, to criticize it as well, and personally because I think it's a great opportunity for Austrians for Austrian economics to get into feminist economics and offer alternatives to feminist economists, is instead to avoid that they resort to other school of thoughts like institutionalism or post-Keynesianism or even socialism. Okay, so that said, I would like to begin presenting my paper by defining what feminist economics is. It is a field of study within economic science, which appear in the second half of the 20th century as a consequence of the convergence between economic theory and feminist epistemology. It is and it was a critique of mainstream neoclassical economics, which feminist economists regard as a current built on a gender-biased epistemology, thus having a gender-biased theory too. One of the most famous critique of feminist economics is related to traditional economic indicators, to economic measurement. Initially, feminist economists tried to understand why economic indicators, the main economic indicators, did not include or value non-market activities that was and are that were and are mainly done by women, like household tasks, raising your children, um, unpaid work in general is mainly done by women, and they try to um, find an answer to the question of why economic indicators did not include these activities that are mainly done by women. Um, the real problem, as they contend, as feminist economists contend, was that neoclassical economics foundations were gender biased. So because the neoclassical economics foundation was imbued by androcentric these androcentric foundations and many concepts that um, only focus on only focus set on a masculine prototypical figure like the Homo economicus, for example. This also affects economic indicators, and this perpetuates an economic science where women's work is absent, which hardly they content contributes to enhancing the current women's conditions in their struggle for economic and social development. I'm saying what they say. Okay, I know that it is maybe a controversial point, but I am right now saying only what they contend. Okay, their proposals then for economic measurement consist of mainly of two options. That it on the one hand to value unpaid work in monetary terms, and on the other hand to measure directly human well-being. Okay, so from the Austrian approach, many comments and critiques can be made. So let's proceed to the rest of the paper. And the first section of the paper is entitled Economic Indicators and the Limits of Economic Calculation. Uh, the first feminist economics critiques centered around the GDP, and they proposed alternative economic indicators uh, that can account for these unpaid work and activities that were mainly done by women. So the method, in short, they resort to the method of imputation of market prices to non-market activities. There are several methods, like three valuation techniques, like the global substitute method, the specialized substitute method, and the opportunity cost method. But in all cases, the question is that non-monetized economic activities are computed at the cost of inputs or the price of outputs. Thus, market prices are inputted to activities that are out of the market and are not exchanged. Okay. From an Austrian may contend that economic measurement is ultimately based on economic calculations. So the limits of economic calculation are the limits of economic measurement. Okay. In that sense, economic calculation is a tool that allows to make decisions more efficiently. Is feasible only with cardinal numbers. Cardinal numbers that are used in economic calculations are what we call prices. The price, as we know, result from an ordinal and subjective valuation, which take place when two individuals decide to exchange a good. Moreover, a price is a historical fact which depends on value judgments of the individuals involved in the exchange. It is also important to consider in that regard the role of money. Prices are expressed in money. Without money, there cannot be economic calculation, thus there cannot be economic measurement. That's very important. Mises asserted economic calculation can't comprehend everything that is exchanged against money. So in that sense, economic calculation cannot encompass all those activities that are not exchanged against money, which are precisely unpaid work, household tasks, care work, and so on. The method of inputting market prices to activities that are not traded exceeds the limits of economic calculation. Mises says, it is nonsensical to evaluate in money objects which are not negotiated on the market and to employ in calculations arbitrary items which do not refer to reality. With that method that feminist economists try to use, they are leading their theory. Their theories are and they are like having they are having a misleading image of reality. To include non-market activities in economic indicators is a theoretical mistake. The price of something is not derived from the general price structure, as the most common methods like this of feminist economists suggest. Uh, for example, we could ask us what would be the price of an activity if it had been exchanged in the market, and if all those unpaid activities had been traded, what would the price structure have been like? That's depends on that things depend on a great amount of dispersed and subjective knowledge, and also in counterfactual um, um, way of thinking. Okay, and that's for sure something that is unsound, and it is not real. Does not correspond to economic reality. That would be the critique of Austrian economics to this proposal of proposal of feminist economics in regard to economic indicators, um, and the fact of including unpaid activities in economic indicators. So the next method that they have proposed is the dialectic to measure well-being. Okay, because because neoclassical economics is gender biased. Um, Economics must focus on well-being rather than income. Income is not, as feminist economists contend, a proxy, not even a proxy of well-being. So they propose to focus directly on well-being. In that sense, they propose to measure that well-being, and even says that if other feminine characteristics uh, could be included in, for example, in economic theory, like for example altruism, that they consider a behavior neglected in the prototypical Homo economicus, for example, for being a feminine feature. Theories, Paula England, contend that this will facilitate making interpersonal utility comparisons. As the Austrians already know, that is not possible from a subjectivist viewpoint. In fact, Steve Horowitz criticized that point of England in his paper by resorting to Austrian subjectivism. Okay, although feminist economists try to measure well-being, well-being cannot be measured. It's a subjective category. It depends on the individual view, situation, perceptions, or thinking. That is because it is because it is a very exclusive and personal question. It cannot be measured. That is also intimately related to the impossibility of economic calculation in socialism. Moreover, well-being, like utility, is not a cardinal category. It cannot be expressed in cardinal numbers, since according to Rothbard, there is no objectively extensive unit of well-being, in this case, a necessary requisite of measurement. It cannot be measured through quantitative methods. If any, it has to be through qualitative methods. Um, Moreover, it is common as well among feminist economists to resort to surveys as a tool for measurement. However, Coyne and Bitke point out that surveys cannot aggregate well-being into a unified category because these categories are fixed and limited to the interviewer's subjective conception. And plus, how to compare surveys responses across different periods and individuals, that's obviously impossible, not only because of the time factor, but because of the very subjective nature of well-being. So having rejected the idea of alternative monetary aggregates that account for non-market work through imputation of market prices and the impossibility of measure well-being, we have to now to refer to another very famous position within feminist economics, namely, which is based on the capability approach, as is what it was developed by Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum. The capabilities, they say, can serve as a proxy of well-being, as a reflection of well-being, rather focusing on income. A capability is defined as the ability to be and to do what an individual wants to be and do. With this standpoint, well-being, from the feminist viewpoint, is not more understood only as a material category which depends on the income. Instead, well-being becomes a broader dimension that drains the capabilities, the ability to choose the life one wants to live. It cannot be denied that the capability approach is closer to Austrian subjectivism than the mainstream materialistic approach. Sen, in fact, goes beyond materialistic limits and affirms that well-being depends on the not depends that depends not on the objective categories such as income, but on things that subjectively one has reason to value. That's These are sense words. However, this position is not completely consistent with Austrian subjectivism. It seems that Sen considers certain ends as universally common and given, something that clashes with Austrian subjectivism. For instance, Nussbaum identifies several capabilities as universal, such as good health, adequate shelter, to have to use the sense, to be able to use the sense to imagine, think, or reason. Actually, there may be a vast array of ends that are widely pursued by many individuals, but it's not something permanent or immutable. It is determined by the sum of subjective individuals and values. Okay.
So Vincent, just one point you should smoothly think to come to a conclusion.
Okay, perfect. Yes, that's also a flaw of feminist economics from this Austrian viewpoint. And after having examined these 2 points of feminist economics from the Austrian subjectivism, we identified a contradiction. That is, if feminist economics rejects quantitative methods because they contend that they are gender biased, why they propose other quantitative methods to solve this problem. This is illustrated in when they propose a feminist econometrics, no, right? Measuring is such subjective categories, and it cannot be measured as feminist economists try to do. Austrian subjectivism, in that sense, can improve feminist economics through a qualitative methodology, a more humanistic methodology. And of course, it is true that economics must resort to objective data and economic facts when necessary. But I think in that sense that Austrian methodology can contribute a lot to feminist methodology in regard to the defense of qualitative methods to avoid what they um, say they are what they say um, they are the problem of gender biases in economic theory. And finally, the conclusion thus is that from an Austrian subjectivist viewpoint, the imputation of market prices to non-market activities is misleading. Well-being cannot be measured. The capability approach is not as subjectivist as Austrian economics, although it's closer to Austrian subjectivism than the materialistic neoclassical viewpoint. And because of given that feminist economists resort to that methods of imputation and the measuring of well-being, they fall into a contradiction in epistemological terms that I think that Austrian subjectivism can solve and improve feminist economic theory and feminist economic methodology. So that's all. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you very much, Vincent, for your nice talk. We have time, a couple of 10 minutes to take one or two questions from the audience. I think that Edgar Carlos has a questions.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I think it's very interesting. I wanted to ask you, I see that you're trying to rescue some of the criticisms that feminist economics try to do to mainstream economics. But I wanted to ask you if you think that we Austrians couldn't reject feminist economics on the grounds of polylogism. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, but the logical structure of your mind is the same. And if you're talking about science, there's no point of differentiation based on gender, as it is not possible to differentiate. I mean, it has no case to do it based on race or nationality or anything else. So that's my question. Is this a case of polylogism?
Okay. Okay. Yes. Thank you for your question. I think it's a good. It's something that I haven't thought, in fact, but um, when studying this current that we may call Austrian feminist economics, for example, uh, we have to be aware of the fact that um, we cannot. I think that feminist economics has nothing to add to Austrian economics. I think it's just the opposite. Okay, I think that it is not the aim of this research is basically that Austrian economics can um, introduce itself in feminist economics, so that feminist economists uh, do not have to resort to alternative economic theories like post-Keynesianism, socialism, institutionalisms. So we can uh, attain that Austrian economics gets into that current, and obviously because of that, because uh, our our grounds are on Austrian economics and not on feminist economics, we have to be conscious of the limits of our analysis. We cannot fall into contradictions with Austrian principles. So I think that question of polylogism, it is important to have to bear in mind that question, and I think that it will like impose a limit of the of this convergence between Austrian and feminist economics. So in that regard, for example, I don't see any polylogism if we, for example, when we are talking about the Homo economicus, for example, if Austrian economics directly sees this prototypical this prototype as, for example, as neutral in regard to value judgments, for example. No, I think it would be that, for example, is not something that a feminist economists see, but I think that Austrian economics can enrich feminist views on that question. For example, even to solve the possible polylogisms that feminist economics has. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vincent, for your answer. And you have two more hands raised. I mean, one is Philip Bagus, so Professor Bagus.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Vicente, I did not hear all of your presentation because I was in the car driving to a class. I just wanted to give you a literature recommendation, which is Oscar Morgenstern's book on the accuracy of economic data or economic observation. So I'm not sure if you have it in your paper, but if not, I think it would be good to have a look on it.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't have it in the paper, so thank you very much for the recommendation, Professor.
Okay, and the last question by Brecht Arnert.
Well, it's more of a comment, actually. I think feminist economics should not be improved. It should be abolished. Because feminism is sexual Marxism. That's all it is. We take the individual as the starting point of analysis. And if you aggregate the individual to all of us, you have neoclassicism. If you aggregate the individual to a sex or a profession or an age category, you have semi-neoclassical economics. So even the premise is wrong. And that is why I liked the jury, not just me, liked your paper, because you start with a very valid critique, especially the part about the epistemological contradictions. I would amplify that. But that is why you have been nominated also for the Macrotrends Prize for the Development of Austrian Economics. I think it is a very important line of inquiry, because through the back door, socialism is coming with these kind of, rebranding.
Exactly, that's the point. Yes.
Of the same thing, and we have to kill it. Just kill it, okay. Because it's not because. And there are valid observations, and I will not continue very long speaking, but there are valid observations in feminist economics. For instance, that a lot of labor that women do is not being paid. But it is not because this is a valid observation that the conclusion has to follow that we have to somehow devise a policy for that.
Yeah,
that does not follow.
Yeah.
And so the Austrian view is the conservative view. And if you look at Menger, he was a Catholic, and the first saint in the Catholic theology is Maria. So the conservative view on the economy, is more feminist than the socialists. But this is a large debate. I just wanted to say congratulations with your paper, and you are the third of 3 people that have been nominated for the prize.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And it is a great honor as well. So yes, I also want to recommend to Brecht to have a look on my next paper, because I precisely comment that that thing of individualism and how the praxeological, indeed, methodology
That's it.
could clash or not, or otherwise, or on the contrary, combine with with some feminist increase. But I think I comment it and I develop it in the paper, so I think it would be interesting to have a look on it, and as well to criticize and comment it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, everybody, for this interesting discussion. And now it's time to move to the second paper of the session, paper entitled Urban Intervention, Economic Prosperity and Psychological Well-Being by Ferré-Clabau. So Ferré, the floor is yours. If David, the first paper on Austrian welfare economics, a critical approach by Igor Vysocki and David Megar. If David is ready to present his paper, I suggest to move now to the third paper, and we can come back later on to the second paper by Ferré.
Yes, we are here. We will present it together.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you for the possibility of presentation. And me and Igor are PhD candidates at the Nicolaus Copernicus University in Torun, Poland. We are mainly interested in such topics as philosophy of economics or ethics in economics. And the topic of our presentation is Austrian welfare economics, a critical approach. This is also the title of our paper on the subject. It was published in one of Polish journals, and it is available online. But as we realized, in fact, there is more than one Austrian welfare theory, so we need to precise that we are concerned with Rothbardian welfare economics, as presented in his seminal paper entitled Toward a Reconstruction of Utility and Welfare Economics. Our agenda has two general points. And the first point, we would like to show some possible interpretations of efficiency, or to be more precise, efficient changes or Pareto superior moves in economics, and showing the triviality or inconsistency with Austrian methodology. We are going to show how can we come to the Rothbardian conclusion.
But just one quick, excuse me, do you have some slides? I just see your calendar, but I don't see any slides. Maybe it's
we unfortunately we don't have slides.
Okay, then okay.
All right. So in the second point, we are going to criticize Rothbardian view on welfare economics. We are going to present our thought experiment in order to explain problems with that position on welfare economics. And moreover, we are going to show its circularity, or maybe to be more precise, that there's begging the question fallacy in this argument. So to begin with, we need to ask what is the standard of efficiency? And as we think, most of all, we need to remember that on the grounds of Austrian school, efficiency relies on preference satisfaction, and there are no interpersonal comparisons of utility allowed. So that is the reason we need to look for such a standard of efficiency which allows us to stick to both of these assumptions. As we know from the history of economic thought, a solution to the problem of interpersonal comparisons of utility was the idea of Pareto efficiency, and Vilfredo Pareto presented his concept of efficiency, which relies on such a moves in which there is at least one person who benefits in terms of preference satisfaction, and there is no one who loses. In other words, we could say that a change of state of affairs is efficient only when there is at least one person who is better off, and no one is worse off. So, the first possible standard of comparison we can consider is opportunity cost. As we know from Austrian theory, every action is efficient compared to opportunity cost. So this view seems to be consistent. However, for our considerations, we think it is too broad. For since it is true for all actions, it is useless in search for efficiency. In terms of opportunity cost, there's nothing that could differ one action from another. To illustrate that point, let's consider so-called gunman case. When gunman comes to you and says money or life, and you give him your money, in terms of opportunity cost, it is of course efficient change. Giving up money, you benefit compared to your opportunity cost, which is death. As we think, we all agree that would be an absurd conclusion. So the second possible standard of comparison we can consider is increase of utility over time. That is, economic actor is getting better off compared to previous state of affairs when his general utility increases. This could be maintained in neoclassical economics. However, the problem within Austrian tradition would be, we think, as follows. First, on the Austrian grants, we employ ordinal concept of utility and not cardinal one. So we cannot sum these subjective and non-measurable values. And the second problem is that in Austrian school, we assume that preferences change over time. In other words, preferences are not constant. That is, goal to which we refer our utility satisfaction can be different at every single moment. As we see, then summing utility in time is wrong conclusion too. The question is then, what could be the solution, since above mentioned standards are not satisfying? And well, as Rothbard tries to convince us, an action or exchange can be efficient only when it is voluntary. Actually, to be more precise, he claims that voluntariness is sufficient condition for action to be efficient, at least in ex ante sense, of course, as he stresses it out. And it might be maybe not surprising that it was Pareto himself who already claimed that only voluntary traits increase utility. However, as we believe there is something suspicious in Austrian view on voluntariness, and to be more strict, we claim that it assumes libertarian ethics of property rights, and as my colleague Igor will show, that's the reason why Rothbardian welfare theory seems to be wrong. So Igor, please present our thought experiment.
Hello, gentlemen. I hope I'm audible and everything is loud and clear. If you could confirm it, I would be more than grateful.
I hear you.
We hear you. It's okay. Thanks.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So thanks for having us. Like we feel privileged to present our investigations. David has set really high standards, and I hope to do at least as well. We start with our observation that Rothbard's argument for free market actually relies on normative premises, which is, I would call our objection no economic argument view, which is in fact a sufficient condition for Rothbard for voluntary exchange is the lack of coercion or the absence of aggression. This was spelled out best, in my view, by Jeffrey Herbener in his 2008 paper, which I will quote now. So the quote goes as follows. Voluntary and involuntary interactions are defined in economics to recognize the distinction between cases in which it is possible to deduce that a person is better off from an interaction with another person, and cases in which it is possible to deduce that he's worse off. Each person comes to an exchange with his naturally owned property. A voluntary exchange occurs when neither trader uses or threatens violence against the property of the other. If the two persons trade the ownership of property without aggressive violence, then the exchange is voluntary. Given the natural ownership of property, each person chooses an alternative he prefers more than the non-interaction alternative. Both traders benefit. If one person violently aggresses against the property of the other person, then the exchange is involuntary. Given the natural ownership of property, the aggressor chooses an alternative that he prefers more than the non-interaction alternative, and the victim is forced to choose an alternative that he prefers less than the non-interaction alternative. The aggressor benefits and the victim loses. That's a lengthy quote indeed, but it's really critical for our purposes. The problem with the view is that we believe it makes voluntariness redundant. If we know sufficiently that an exchange would be efficient or Pareto superior because prior rights were not violated, then in our view, voluntariness really drops out of the picture. There's no separate or further question whether the exchange is voluntary. We already know everything if we establish whether rights were violated, in fact, or by our proposal, or not. Therefore, like at least on Herbenet's view, if we reconstruct it rationally, it looks that the predicate of voluntariness is basically redundant. Given that, we might have a reason to doubt the Rothbardian implicit premise that all voluntary exchanges are beneficial or Pareto superior. And our thought experiment is this. That's the one we proposed in our original paper, David mentioned. The intuition is as follows. Imagine we have a competitor. So we're running a business, and a competitor comes to us saying that he will resign, he will refrain from competing with us for, let's say, $1,000. Because we believe he's a major actor and he would threaten our business, we decide to pay him. The competitor leaves and the status quo is preserved. So we just lost $1,000 for to let the status quo obtain. In another case, we have our tax collector case, which is the tax collector comes and, as usual, they threaten us illegitimately that we'll go to prison unless we pay $1,000. As expected, we do pay him, and the tax collector disappears. Then again, it looks like we paid $1,000 for status quo to be preserved. But we can do even better than that. So we have an even closer analogy. As we know from libertarian theory, as advocated by Bloch at least, blackmail in a free society would be legitimate. That is, given no prior contracts, the threatening with informational blackmail, that is revealing some information, would be legitimate. Just briefly, libertarian theory predicts that whether a threat is legitimate or not depends on only one thing, that is a legitimacy of what is threatened. Because revealing information in the absence of prior contracts is legitimate, then the whole threat would be legitimate. So now, imagine we have one legitimate blackmailer coming to us and saying that he will reveal some damaging information about us unless we pay him $1,000. We do pay him again, and he disappears. In another case, there is a blackmailer whom we already paid off. So we hold a right against him that he should not blackmail us any longer. But alas, he's coming anyway, threatening us with a blackmail, which is illegitimate. He says, Although you have a right against me, I will reveal the information about you unless you pay me $1,000. Then again, we do pay him and he disappears. But notice, the first payment was by Rothbardian Herbinarian Lights, was voluntary with a legitimate blackmailer, and the other was involuntary. But we contend there's no economic difference between the two. And only if you share this intuition, then it seems that voluntariness is of an exchange, which is its rights respecting character, is irrelevant for the efficiency of a given exchange. Our last argument is still from our first paper, is that given that we believe that Rothbard's argument really begs the question. Begging the question is a tricky business, which is this involves the premise assuming what's to be concluded yet. But let me quote Rothbard at length. That's from his reconstruction paper. Let us now consider exchanges on the free market. Such an exchange is voluntarily undertaken by both parties. Therefore, the very fact that an exchange takes place demonstrates that both parties benefit, or more strictly, expect to benefit, from the exchange. The fact that both parties choose the exchange demonstrates that they benefit. The free market is the name, for the array of all the voluntary exchanges that take place in the world. Since every exchange demonstrates a unanimity of benefit for both parties concerned, we must conclude that the free market benefits all its participants. After reconstruction, we can put the Rothbardian argument in a syllogistic form, which is as follows. Premise 1 is the definitional premise Rothbard has, which is all market exchanges are voluntary exchanges. Basically, what we mean by market exchanges are voluntary exchanges. Fair enough, that's the definition, we take no issue with that. 2, all voluntary exchanges are beneficial, or at the very least, the parties thereto expect to benefit. Therefore, all market exchanges are beneficial, or at the very least, the parties thereto expect to benefit. But note that the conclusion that all market exchanges are beneficial is nothing but a restatement of the Rothbardian premise that all voluntary exchanges are beneficial. After all, remember that all voluntary exchanges are market exchanges. So the relation between the two seems to be that of equivalence. But because we found a reason to doubt that all voluntary exchanges are beneficial, then the Rothbardian argument cannot really convince us. It would take some independent justification of the premise that all voluntary exchanges are beneficial. And this is exactly what we doubt. Okay, given that, I believe that really concludes my bit. So I will pass my voice to David, who will do the concluding then. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, as we hope, our presentation was quite convincing, and as Igor showed in his presentation, it works in very different ways. So we think that we should refer benefiting on or being better off rather to subjective preferences than just this moral baseline or property rights baseline. So that's it. That's all. Thank you for listening.
So thank you very much, Igor and David, for your stimulating talk. We have a couple of minutes to take 1 or 2 questions from the audience before we go back to the second paper of the presentation. So do we have someone in the audience that want to intervene? So it doesn't seem to be the case, and also because now time is running faster than I thought. I think thank you very much Igor and David for your contribution in your paper. And
Thank
now
you.
I invite Ferre Clavau to share his screen, and I hope we have now more success than before to hearing you. So Ferre, try to say something so we can see if it works better.
Hello. Can
okay,
you hear
that's
me?
now it's good. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you to everybody on the organizing committee. Professor Huerta de Soto, I hope you feel well soon. Thank you everybody for being here. I will try at least to share my screen now. Hope this works as well. Can you see my presentation at the moment?
Yes, we do.
Perfect. I just heard that for some reason my upstairs neighbors decided to work at this very moment. So another thing that is not going smoothly, but let's hope we don't have any problems. I will speak about urban intervention, urbanism and architecture today. Or to be more specific, I want to talk about the ways in which urban intervention erodes local knowledge, destroys spontaneous order, and is detrimental to the economic prosperity and even the psychological well-being of the people in a city. There's a lot to say, but we don't have a lot of time, so I try to make my presentation short and sweet. Architecture is one of the most politicized forms of art, and I think one of the most famous examples of this is the idea of the panopticon by Jeremy Bentham. So the idea is that you can get desirable behavior out of people when they think they are being observed at any time, even if that's not the case. Another example is Yuri Bezmenov, a KGB informant under Soviet Russia, who talked about many different ways in which the communist government tried to subvert and demoralize the people of Russia. And one of the most important ways, according to Bezmenov, was through architecture. But we don't even have to look at examples of dictatorial regimes to find similar cases. The man you see on the screen here is Le Corbusier, and the blueprint of Le Corbusier's architecture was very influential in modern Europe. And even this man writes very explicitly in his own work, but also in works like L'Esprit Nouveau, he writes about how his architecture was a program of social engineering and how, in alliance with the government, they try to destroy this idea of the romantic individual and put in place something else, mainly a pragmatic calculator who only consumes. So more and more, the importance of architecture and urban planning is coming to forefront, and especially the connection these days with mental health. I'm not going to talk about this part of it, but for the people who are interested, I would advise you to look into the neurological experiments we have concerning modern architecture. We can see how, for example, the parts of the brain that are in charge of disgust and of fear are illuminated while when people are confronted with modern architecture. Very interesting. The Austrian school, of course, cannot be behind the conversation, so there are numerous good publications within the Austrian framework about this subject. And there is even a Keynes versus Hayek debate going on concerning this subject. Robert Moses, who would be Keynes in this example, and then James Jacobs, who would be Hayek in this example. What happened? Well, after the Great Depression, the city of New York was convinced that certain necessary conditions were in order to be prepared for the upcoming economic innovations. And of course, as good statists do, they were convinced that it was not only possible to know these necessary conditions fully, but that it was also possible to put somebody in charge to create these necessary conditions. And what happened, Robert Moses was appointed and they gave him legal power, and through commissions and public initiatives, he made, between brackets, the city of New York ready for these new economic innovations. In reality, what does that mean? Well, he cleared out a lot of communities, he replaced a lot of communities, a lot of businesses were replaced, and so on and so forth. And a person who protested this was the lady you see over here, Jane Jacobs, but she didn't protest it out of some vague hippie kind of feeling. She protested it because she was convinced that it was impossible to create and reshape communities, and that any form of governmental intervention when it comes to urban planning is detrimental to the economic vibrance of a city. Because we can never know, and especially interventionists or planners can never know to the full extent of all the tacit knowledge that is living among these people in a city. So the city has a spontaneous order. And within our school, within the Austrian school, who wrote an article and more on this is Sanford Ikeda. His article, Urban Interventionism and Local Knowledge, is very interesting. And what I like about it is that he talks about how interventionism changes local knowledge, but he also stresses the following point, that after that, and after the consequences of interventionism, we will see how those consequences reinforce interventionism once again. And to me, the second point is even more interesting, because we can have the economic consequences of interventionism, but then we have the mental or psychological consequences. And for example, people become more docile, and after, let's say, the first doses of interventionism, people will long for a second doses of interventionism. So one of the things he says is, to the extent that interventions prevent relative prices from reflecting contextual knowledge, expectations and the plans based on them will fail to coordinate. And when we talk about this contextual knowledge, it's important that we are not only talking about goods and services. We are talking about contextual knowledge of social capital, of norms and of trust levels. And this is why I put the picture of Bowling Alone by Robert T. Putnam here. It's a very interesting case because Putnam is actually a left-leaning sociologist, and he didn't want to publish his book for a very long time, because before he started the research, he was convinced that public initiatives were very beneficial not only to the economy, but also to the local community, to the social capital, the norms levels, the trust levels, the cohesion. And after his research, he found out that was not the case at all, actually quite the opposite. So he sat on his work for a very long time. So as Hayek says, the most important change which extensive government control produces is a psychological change, an alteration in the character of the people. If you think, for example, about the consequences of legal positivism, as Hans Hermann Hoppe would say, that makes contributors to drunkards and adults into children. So there's this mental change as well, but legal positivism is one example, but now we are talking about cities and urbanism. So what is the view of Jane Jacobs on a good city? Well, it's actually quite Austrian. A city, we are talking about individuals who are in exchange relations with each other. There is a certain tacit knowledge that comes about, and to the best of every individual's intentions, we try to crystallize that knowledge, and institutions form. And in a way, a city is an institution in the Mengerian sense. And it's interesting to see how, when we are talking about planners and people who think it is possible to rationalistically plan a city, they always start with function. They ask themselves the questions, well, what do we need? Where do we have to put it? We need this, we need it over there, then it's gonna work, and so on. But of course, as we know, the reality is that it doesn't function. But when we look at the spontaneous growth of cities, we do not start with these ideas. We do not start with function as the imperative and to then try and intervene to make that function better and better, but we end up with a city that is actually very functional. So the reason I put Roger Scruton's book on here, Green Philosophy, is because in this book he talks about the concept of oikophobia. And oikophobia is the fear of home, the fear of your own surroundings. And his claim is that it's the fear of home or the lack of love for home that create certain environmental problems. And I would claim that it's the same case for cities. If you live in a city where all your social activities, the places you visit, the buildings you see, the economic connections that you need, but also the economic possibilities that you have, if all of this is something that you as an individual did not choose, but also that you as a people of a city did not choose, when you feel it's something that has been put upon you or fallen upon you, then you feel no tutelage towards your city. You feel no sense of responsibility, and therefore you will also show no sense of entrepreneurship or creativity. So that's an economic and psychological nightmare. Cities are self-ordering, self-sustaining, and self-regulating. And then what would be some examples of that? Well, in spontaneous cities, we see, first of all, and very important, mixed primary uses, by which I mean you will not have a quarter solely for diners and restaurants and pubs, and then another quarter solely for living, sleeping. No, large uses of numbers of people during the whole day. It is not stratified. Turning corners are very important in spontaneous cities. And there's something very interesting about corners because it's literally when people say opportunity waits around the corner. Well, it's literally where you bump into somebody. You bump into somebody when you take a left, take a right, somebody else is coming, you don't see him. And this may sound kind of like trivial, but these kind of day-to-day things are, without sounding very theoretical or technical, they are the basis for a lot of serendipitous connections, a feeling of creativity, a feeling of possibilities, and these are very important for a good city life and a good city economy. A city is also dense and mostly homogeneous and has a homogeneous concentration of people. So the importance of eyes on the street, the importance of social control, and why is that important? Well, because it makes it so that order and civility are not coming from coercion instead, are not coming from police instead. The best police that you can have is some old lady in a city who knows everybody and who just looks around. Like I'm trivializing it a little bit, but it's to make it more clear. This is an example of how it should not work. These are pictures of a city called Almere in the Netherlands. And this is an experiment of rationalistic planning. So this is a city that is completely top-down planned. And very early on, there were already a lot of problems. For example, there was a lot of vandalism and theft. Why? Well, the almighty planners thought it was a good idea to put all of the shops in one specific place, and there were no shops in all the other places. And so obviously what happens? Well, it's 6 o'clock, all of the shops close, there is literally no one there. Vandalism occurs, theft occurs. Another thing, people were starting to become depressed and unhappy because, as you see on the second picture, their homes were their homes. It's where you go to eat and to sleep, but there are no other facilities around. There's not a park, there's not a sporting facility, there's not a theater, nothing. So an example of how not only your economy gets destroyed, but also your mental state gets destroyed. I probably don't have time to talk about this. I can pretty much conclude this slide by saying that the planning of Moses in the city of New York did not work, and slowly but surely the city started to deteriorate, not only economically but also psychologically. But of course, as we all know, what is the answer of the government when something doesn't work? Well, we just need more of it. And we have seen this trend throughout the last decennia, is that the response has not been to remove urban planning interventions, but rather to push for more of them. But now it's just called smart growth. And since we know by reading Alexis de Tocqueville, always be aware when a government is implementing a new idea and trying to sell it to you with a fancy little word, because there's a lot going on then. But all of these things, like greater control, and I'm nearly concluding now, greater control on car usage, narrower limits on residential density, prohibitions of private constructions, they stem from a static view of what a city is. In the sense that James Jacobs would say, it's not that I disagree with all of their ideas. It's the fact that they think that their ideas will work when they just implement it from one day to another. The question is not planning or no planning. The question is not, is this good? Is that good? The question is a question of origin. Who does the planning? And I wanted to conclude by giving an alternative to Almere. So Almere was the artificially created city, and this is called Project Oosterwold, and it's very interesting for the people who find this fascinating to Google a little bit about this. I'm not saying this is libertarian paradise, not at all, but it's an experimental large-scale transformation zone where I just heard. Is everybody still hearing me? Yeah, okay. So I'm finishing now. This is a large-scale transformation zone, and it has no master plan. It has no zoning map. Only a few limiting number of framework rules. And so it's very interesting. Entrepreneurs buy a piece of property on it, and they start doing whatever they want to do. But as you can read, all the initiators have to provide all the needed facilities of the area. The streets, the public green areas, the cycling paths. And to conclude, when I was looking at my presentation before I was trying to present it, I thought, now with this whole COVID situation, I wonder how the people of Oosterwold are doing. And so I Googled it, and it was funny to see. The first thing I read was that sadly the federal government of the Netherlands had sent in not police but BOA's, but I don't know the English. The community service officers, they had to send in a troop of community service officers because nobody was wearing a mask. But anyway, I will conclude my presentation here. Obviously, if you have questions, please tell me. We didn't hear any noises from my upstairs neighbors, so thank you, everybody. That was my presentation.
So thank you very much, Ferre, for your exciting presentation. I really enjoy the diversity and multidisciplinarity of Austrian economics, and I think you make a great contribution to the conference by bringing to us a theme that is not very usual for us to think about. But before we take some questions to you, can you say some words about you? What is your activity?
Yes. After the chaos of all the technical difficulties, I forgot that. I'm Ferre Claveau, and I am currently following the doctoral program in Austrian economics at the University Rey Juan Carlos. I think that suffices.
Okay, so you are not. You are interested also in architecture, but from the economic side of the thing.
Well, I chose. There's a reason I chose this particular subject, and because I have a lot of theoretical projects going on, and a lot of them are more technical, economical. But I thought we have the strength of Austrian economics and the praxeological approach is that we realize in a way that so many things that other schools just reject as that's another subject, that's another topic. We realize that in a way these things are all connected, and a lot of things that are very important to economic prosperity, but also to mental well-being, are the things that we just take for granted, the day-to-day things. And architecture is one of them, and the streets we walk in is one of them, but the people we meet is one of them. So I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about these things, because we have the possibility to realize these things are important because of our perspective. But even then, we would sometimes forget that there is a great bit of economic value in the little small things of life, and not just in grand theories. So
yeah, okay, thank you. So do we have some questions? So you have time, it's about 1:45, but maybe we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Raise your hand, or I think Brecht, I see you raising your hand on camera.
Yes, I have. Ferre, can you stop sharing your screen? Because.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. But didn't realize that was still going on.
I have a question. You say that a city is an institution. I think that is a very interesting idea, because if we follow Menger in saying that institutions are not designed, it's actually coming from Ferguson, from way before that, not the result of human design, but of human action, so of unconscious action. And so if you look at medieval cities, like in Flanders, we have a lot of medieval cities, how they organically grow. And now city planning. What is my question? I don't know. The question maybe, yeah, it's so new. But maybe the question would be, now we have all these city plans, and now we have like socialism or collectivism in concrete almost. How can you get back to like the organic city? How are we ever going to achieve that?
Yeah. Difficult question, big question as well. I think I am convinced that a shift will happen, but I think the shift will not happen in the way we think it will. A lot of people think that changes in general, be it through the economic system, or be it socially, morally, a lot of people think that, well, you have this particular conviction, this particular reality, and suddenly new people will be in charge, or suddenly the system will fail and they will find a new paradigm, and then everything will change. But I see it the other way around. In the sense of your question, there are still certain, on a local community level, there are still certain liberties that we can have and that we can use in our advantage, because I would say the system does not realize that they are dangerous. So even within, when we're talking about legislation concerning urban intervention, concerning zone maps, there are still certain things that are allowed because they themselves do not realize that it could lead to something that is dangerous for their legislation. And I think on a very communal level, what you will see is that, and especially now, I mean, we all feel it, we all know it, that the world is in a very weird place right now, and more people are getting frustrated, even if they do not have the technical or theoretical background to understand why this is the case. And because of that, people will start to live differently. And a lot of people do not need theory to start living differently. We are people of theory in this team, but a lot of people who do not even know about the Austrian school, they will feel the unhappiness, they will look around them, they will see that something is not working, and they will reorganize. And I think COVID has been a very interesting study case, because what we have seen is a lot of old things, but actually things that function, coming back. People are creating their own materials more again. People are starting gardens again. People are depending more and more. They cannot go to the big supermarket because they don't want to wait 2 hours in a line. So they are depending more. I know my friend makes his own beer, and people will start to reorganize and only then up to the point that the people will catch up with the system and not the other way around. And then possibility of the system, of changing the system, will be there. I know it was a big question. I try to make something out of it. I don't, so to answer in brief one sentence, I don't think we have to look at a way in which we actively reverse that, because I think it will come from our actions, and then only later on we will theorize or find a theory for those actions.
Okay, thank you very much, Ferre. You talk about COVID crisis, and I think it's a very good conclusion because it's also the topics of the next afternoon. As I already mentioned, we just have learned that Jamin Alban will not be able to present his paper on mathematical theory of economic growth. Therefore, the paper of Ninov Yuli will be shifted to the 8th session, and that's the 8th session will start at 20 to 3, so 14:40, and this last session will then have 4 papers. Now we have about 2 hours break to have lunch, and I look forward to meeting you again. I repeat, at 20 to 3 for the last session. And again, thank you to all the presenters of these sessions for the interesting and stimulating discussion, and enjoy your lunch.